When I was young, I lost both of my parents and was taken in by the family of one of my father's old comrades in the countryside. With the support of David's parents, I married him, a childhood friend whom I had grown up with. But I never knew that he had already fallen in love with someone else. After the wedding, he refused to touch me, yet still allowed others to blame me for being infertile. Instead of defending me, my in-laws scolded me and even brought two children from distant relatives into the home for me to raise. David, indifferent, went off to join the military and only came back once a year at most. 18 years passed like that. I raised those children until they became successful and were admitted to Tsinghua University. But then, at their graduation banquet, David returned home with another woman and publicly announced that those two children were actually his biological kids, with his lover. I watched as their happy six-person family celebrated together and realized, in that moment, that I was the only one who had been deceived. Heartbroken and furious, I left in a daze, but in the darkness of night, I stumbled and fell off a cliff. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the first year of our marriage. Chapter 1. David's mother was seated in the main hall while his father smoked his pipe quietly beside her. The small room was filled with scattered relatives, barely enough space to move. Besides David and his parents, David holding two babies in his arms, everyone else looked at me with sidelong glances. I stood silently at the doorway, saying nothing. David's mother cleared her throat and said, "Lily, you arrived just in time. Your aunt recently gave birth to twins. She already has 3 children, so when she heard you were having trouble conceiving, she decided to send them here to ask if you'd be willing to raise them." I lifted my gaze and scanned the room. Amidst the crowd, Sandra was watching David with tenderness in her eyes, her gaze full of affection as she looked at the children he held. So even back then, Sandra had already entered my life. Everyone was waiting for my response, but David's mother looked calm, as if she was sure I wouldn't say no. After all, for the past year, she had interrogated me about my ability to have children during every meal, morning and night, until my face turned pale from embarrassment and shame. I turned to David and asked, "Do you want to raise them?" He looked surprised by the question. He frowned. "That's women's business. It has nothing to do with men. If you want to raise them, I won't stop you." "Fine," I said. "Then I won't raise them. But if you do want to raise them, you'd better give them your full devotion or else." "Wait, what did you say?" David froze, staring at me in disbelief. The room fell silent. I repeated calmly, "I'm only 19 years old. I can still get pregnant. Why should I raise someone else's children?" David looked at me disapprovingly. "How can you be so unreasonable? Your aunt meant well. I didn't expect you to be this selfish." I smiled and replied, "I won't raise them. If they're registered under my name, I'll file for divorce." With that, I ignored everyone's stunned expressions, turned around, and walked toward the village mailbox. Chapter 2. I received a letter addressed to me. When I opened it, my eyes filled with emotion. Inside was a 100 yuan bill and a stack of food and fabric ration coupons, precious resources during the shortages of the 1980s. The sender was Professor Oliver, my parents' university mentor, who had always treated me like his own granddaughter. Sadly, in my past life, I didn't know about his quiet support until after I had spent 18 years raising David's children and making sure they were admitted to Tsinghua University. It was then that I discovered his letters and financial help had all been stolen by David's parents. In the mailbox, I also found my admission letter to Tsinghua, something that had been hidden from me by my aunt's family in my past life. They had done everything they could to break my wings and lock me inside their home, making sure I had no other choice but to serve them like a maid. When I reached the entrance of the village, I greeted the aunt who ran the shop and told her I needed to make a phone call to an old friend of my parents. She had watched me grow up in my aunt's household and understood the pain of being raised under someone else's roof. With sympathy, she refused my money and let me use the phone for free. Coincidentally, she needed to make a delivery and asked me to watch over the store for a while. Grateful for her kindness, I silently promised that I would repay her someday. Then I dialed a number in Beijing. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. An elderly but strong voice answered. "Hello? Who is this?" With a trembling voice, I said, "Grandpa Oliver, it's me, Lily." "Lily? My dear child, You finally remember this old man. He was overjoyed to hear from me. When he found out I had been accepted to Tsinghua again, he was even more thrilled. If your parents could see you now, they would be so proud. I told him about my current situation and informed him that I would be coming to Beijing in 3 days to prepare for university. Upon hearing about my hardships, his tone grew heavy with regret that he hadn't been able to protect me before. But hearing my decision, he supported me completely and insisted that I stay with him first. After hanging up, I let out a long sigh of relief. I carefully hid the money and my admission letter in a place only I knew. Just 3 more days, and I would finally change my fate. Chapter 3. When I returned home, most of the relatives had already left. Only my in-laws, David and Sandra, remained, each holding one of the children. I slipped in quietly without making a sound. I heard Sandra's anxious voice. "David, what if Lily refuses to raise them?" David replied coldly, "She'll have to, whether she wants to or not. In a month, I'll be leaving for the army, and you'll be going off to university. Who will take care of the children then?" His mother chimed in, "Sandra, don't worry. Focus on your studies. A good mother must be educated like you. Lily grew up in our house. She wouldn't dare disobey us." His father added with authority, "It's settled. In this family, she doesn't have the right to have an opinion." I felt nothing. Any emotions I once had already been worn away by years of sacrifice in my past life. I stepped into the room. The 4 of them jolted, eyes scanning my face, trying to figure out how much I had heard. I looked at Sandra. Perhaps out of guilt, she quickly averted her gaze. David stepped in front of her protectively and said seriously, "This is my cousin Sandra. She got accepted into the teacher's university and will be living with us for the next month." I nodded silently. I pretended not to hear the relieved sigh from my mother-in-law. After dinner, I went straight to my room and started packing. I separated everything related to David and set them aside. There were only a few things that actually belonged to me, just one winter coat and a few pieces of light summer clothing. Compared to Sandra's woolen coat, mine wasn't even worth half the fabric. If I remembered correctly, her coat was bought using the fabric coupons that Grandpa Oliver had sent me. Even though he sent generous amounts of money every month, my mother-in-law kept almost all of it, leaving me only scraps. After all these years of raising children and serving them, I'd consider that money her payment. But to Grandpa Oliver, I would repay every cent. For the first time, David entered my room without even knocking. He tossed a woolen scarf onto my bed, speaking with a tone of superiority, as if he were doing me a favor. "I've neglected you since we got married. I brought this from the city. It's for you." I looked at the scarf. It had the exact same pattern as Sandra's coat. It was probably made from the leftover fabric. And yet, he had the nerve to give me that piece of cloth as if it were a grand gift. Seeing me silent, David assumed I was touched. Taking advantage of the moment, he added, "I'll be leaving for the army in a month. Take good care of the children." After a pause, he continued, "My parents have worked hard for us. Be more considerate and help out more. Don't act like you did tonight, doing nothing." I almost laughed in his face. "Don't you still have a month before you leave? Why don't you help too?" David pressed his lips together and after a long silence muttered, "I'll do my part too." Then he noticed the notebook and the woven bracelet he had once given me, now set aside in a corner. "Why did you take those things out?" "I'm just tidying up. Some things are better thrown away." Before he could respond, a sweet voice called from outside, "David, the hot water's gone." David left immediately to heat the water for Sandra. He didn't return that night. Chapter 4. The next morning I slept until noon, but my mother-in-law was too preoccupied to scold me. She paced around the main hall, muttering to herself, "How could it not be there? Where did it go? Wasn't it supposed to be delivered?" I watched her with amusement, already knowing the answer. "Mom, what are you looking for?" Her gaze flickered to me, but she was convinced I didn't know anything. "Nothing. The kids are hungry. Go make their milk." I let out a sarcastic laugh. "David should do it. He's leaving for the army in a month, won't see them again for a long time." Before she could respond, I rushed out. I knew she had gone to the mailbox this morning and found nothing, none of the money or ration coupons Grandpa Oliver had sent me. She must be in a panic. In my past life, They used that money for everything in the house, everything except me. David used it to bribe his superiors and secure a good position in the military. With his cunning and flattery, he eventually rose to become a minister 18 years later. Sandra's university education was also funded by the money from my letters. They enjoyed my resources like it was their right. Did they really think it would always be this easy? I went to the village youth center, where David, Sandra, and their friends usually gathered. Before entering, I overheard one of David's friends teasing, "David, you care about Sandra so much. Are you really going to let her leave for university?" Sandra nestled into David's chest and replied shyly, "Don't be silly. I only see David as a brother." The friend laughed. "Brother? More like a lover." Everyone laughed cheerfully. David smiled and pulled Sandra close. "When you're in Beijing, don't forget me or the children." Sandra looked up and kissed his cheek. "I won't." Then they started talking about me, and David's tone shifted. I heard him say, "Lily's good at sacrificing. It's better for her to stay home and take care of my parents and the kids. Compared to Sandra, she doesn't stand a chance. She lacks both talent and education." I felt like something had slammed into my chest. Even though I already knew the truth, hearing those cruel words from his mouth filled me with rage. At that moment, a young girl walked in and saw me outside. Shocked, she grabbed my hand. "Sister-in-law? What are you doing out here? Come in." The room froze. David and Sandra quickly separated. David looked at me with disgust. "Why aren't you home with the kids? What are you doing here?" I looked at the lipstick stain on his face and sneered. "David, the kids are hungry. Your mother is calling for you to feed them." His face stiffened, and he had no choice but to follow me home. Sandra bit her lip and followed us. Chapter 5. At the dinner table, my father-in-law told me indifferently that the children's names had already been added to the ancestral registry. I nodded silently. My mother-in-law shot me a glance, then subtly signaled to David. "Autumn is coming and Lily's clothes are worn out. David, take her to the city in 2 days to buy new clothes." David looked at me for a moment, then nodded. Sandra pouted with displeasure. "Sandra should go too." "It's on the way anyway," she said. My mother-in-law looked at me again, clearly expecting a reaction. But I simply nodded again without objection. The entire family seemed a bit surprised. After all, just 2 days ago, I had humiliated them by refusing to adopt the children. But in my mind, I already had a clear plan. Going to the city meant I could buy my train ticket and leave. I wouldn't even need to make up an excuse. It was perfect. "David, I will finally be able to leave you." I had waited 2 lifetimes for this day. 2 days later, just before dawn, David gently woke Sandra, helping her wash up and dress with great patience before coming to knock on my door. But before he could, I had already opened it. David was stunned to see me fully dressed and ready. "Why are you carrying such a big bag?" he asked. I adjusted the strap and replied calmly, "I packed some food." Sandra jumped out from behind him, wrinkling her nose in disdain. "Sister, we're going to the city, not the countryside. Why bring provisions? Do you think there's no food in the city?" David, hearing her, also looked at me with disdain. "Take it if you want, but don't come complaining to me later asking me to carry it." Nothing they said affected me. I answered firmly, "Don't worry. I won't." The only transport available was the village chief's truck, usually used to haul livestock. At that time, owning a vehicle was an impressive luxury. David carefully helped Sandra up, even placing newspaper on her seat to protect her clothes from dirt. Meanwhile, I climbed up on my own, struggling a bit, and found a random corner to sit. An aunt from a neighboring village, noticing how close David and Sandra were, couldn't help but tease, "Oh, newlyweds, huh? So sweet, more affectionate than my husband was when we got married." Sandra froze, her face showing a trace of discomfort. David tensed up and didn't know what to say. It was the village chief who clarified with a smile, "Ma'am, you're mistaken. That one over there is his actual wife." The aunt blinked in confusion, then turned to look at me in disbelief from my corner. She didn't say anything more but muttered under her breath, "Didn't the dynasty fall years ago? Why are they still treating the concubine better than the wife?" Though she said it softly, everyone in the small truck heard it clearly. Sandra blushed furiously and awkwardly distanced herself from David. David, Feeling humiliated, shot me a look full of hatred when no one was watching. But I ignored all the drama. My focus was entirely on the bag in my hands because inside it was my future. Chapter 6. After getting off the truck and watching the people scatter, David looked at me with growing impatience. His tone was cold and dismissive. "Here's 5 yuan. Buy yourself some clothes. Meet me back here at 3. He tossed the crumpled bill in my direction before turning away, wrapping his arm around Sandra, and walking off without looking back. Before disappearing into the crowd, Sandra gave me a pitying glance. I bent down, picked up the money, and tucked it into my pocket. Even though his mother had given him 50 yuan in his mind, I was only worth spending 5. But it didn't matter anymore. I had already written to Grandpa Oliver telling him never to send me money again. Everything he had given me before I would now use to buy my complete freedom. I turned and walked toward the train station. And the moment I sat on the train to Beijing, the tears I had held back for decades finally fell. After wasting my life in that village, I never imagined another life could exist for me. Since the age of 5, I had been sent to live with David's family. He was the only man I had ever spent time with, so naturally, I fell in love with him. But to him, I was only a younger sister, a servant, a tool, never a wife. Maybe the love I had held on to for more than 10 years was nothing but a stubborn obsession. If my parents in heaven had seen my past life watching me live only to serve the family of a Manthi, would have been filled with rage. But it doesn't matter anymore. Because the heavens gave me another chance. Perhaps it was my parents' wish that I wouldn't have to suffer again. This time, I would live for myself. And my future would shine brighter than ever. Chapter 7. When I arrived in Beijing, the first thing I did was go to the Capital Hospital, where I handed several strands of hair to the analysis department. Then I followed the address to Grandpa Oliver's house. It had been so many years since I'd come to Beijing. Standing in front of his majestic and solemn mansion, I felt an unexpected wave of nervousness and unease. The young maid at the door saw me, and her face lit up with joy. "Are you Miss Lily? The master told us you'd be arriving soon. Come in quickly. He's playing chess right now." I nodded and tapped my shoes several times on the ground, making sure the mud fell off before stepping inside. To my surprise, Grandpa Oliver's home was far quieter and more empty than I had imagined. In the spacious living room, 2 elderly men were playing chess. As soon as Grandpa Oliver saw me, he slammed a piece down on the board, scattering the game, grabbed his cane, and rushed over to me. Behind him, the other old man shouted indignantly, "Oliver, you old cheat. You cheated again." Grandpa Oliver's eyes sparkled with emotion as he looked me over from head to toe. "Child, you've suffered too much." Those simple words miraculously erased decades of pain and resentment from my heart. I opened my arms and hugged him tightly, finally allowing myself to cry. A storm of bitterness and renewed hope filled my heart. I told him everything about my life in the village, and as he listened, his expression grew darker and darker with fury. Even the unfamiliar elderly man beside him seemed outraged. "Daughter, leave it to me. That man will divorce you whether he wants to or not. This is a new country, and women are not toys to be trampled on." It was then that Grandpa Oliver introduced me to his old friend, Professor Mario. According to Grandpa Oliver, Professor Mario's wife worked at the Women's Federation, fighting for women's rights. Upon hearing my story, she was deeply moved and immediately filed a petition for a forced divorce with the authorities. When Professor Mario learned that I had been accepted to Tsinghua University, his eyes showed genuine admiration. Before saying goodbye, he looked at me seriously and advised me to focus on my studies. Later, Grandpa Oliver revealed that Professor Mario was a tenured professor in the chemistry department at Tsinghua. In this life, chemistry was the field I most wanted to study. Chapter 8. There was still a month left before classes began at Tsinghua University. I couldn't turn down Grandpa Oliver's warm invitation, so I stayed at his home. At first, I worried that his family might object, but to my surprise, they were just as kind and welcoming as he was. Grandpa Oliver had 2 sons and a daughter, all of whom were married. Every afternoon, the house would be filled with laughter and the joyful noise of grandchildren. My uncles talked with me about my academic future, and my aunt hugged me gently, full of affection. Since the death of my parents, I hadn't felt this kind of warmth. To thank them for their kindness, I helped Grandpa Oliver's grandchildren with their studies every day. Time flew by, and before I knew it, the day had arrived for me to move into the university dorms. I said goodbye to Grandpa Oliver and agreed to return once a week for a family meal, as he had requested. Before moving out, I mailed 2 DNA samples and a letter. What I didn't know was that my departure had triggered complete chaos in David's household. At first, when David and Sandra returned to the village, they didn't even notice that I wasn't on the truck. After all, they only had eyes for each other and never wasted a thought on me. It wasn't until one of the babies soiled the bed that David's mother began shouting my name, demanding I come clean up the mess, but no one answered. That was when David finally remembered Etta had left me behind in the city. His mother panicked and ordered him to go back and find me, but he just shrugged and ignored her. "She's not a child. Can't she find her own way back?" he said, turning away to continue fooling around with Sandra, completely unconcerned. Not even the crying of the babies could pull him away. Sandra, to her credit, felt some pity for the children, but the awful smell made her recoil in disgust. She was a pampered woman, never lifting a finger at home, so she certainly wasn't going to get her hands dirty. David's mother had no choice but to clean up the mess herself, muttering curses about me under her breath. She decided that if I returned, she would punish me like never before. But 4 or 5 days passed, and I never showed up. At last, David realized something was wrong. He borrowed the village chief's truck and headed back to the town to look for me. When the village chief noticed I wasn't with him, he asked, "Where's Lily?" I didn't see her on the return trip. David hesitated before replying. She went to visit her cousin in the city. The village chief frowned with suspicion, knew very well I had no family there. Once back in town, David sought help from his fellow soldiers. They searched from dawn until dusk, asking around, but no one had seen me. David was frustrated and couldn't believe I was causing him so much trouble. Still, he continued looking. Finally, at the train station ticket booth, a woman responded to his description. "Are you talking about a girl in a yellow blouse with a high ponytail?"
Taller, dame.
David's heart began to race. "Yes, ma'am. Do you know where she went?" The woman smiled. "She went to Beijing. Said she was starting university." Her words struck David like a thunderbolt. Lily went to the capital? To study at a university? And what about her family? Chapter 9. David returned home dazed and disoriented. His mother rushed to him, worried. But David, full of frustration and rage, shouted the moment he saw her. "Mom, why didn't you tell me Lily got into a university? She's in Beijing, the capital. She's not coming back." His mother's face turned as pale as a corpse. His father dropped his pipe, and it hit the ground with a sharp crack, breaking in two. Sandra, just stepping out of the room carrying a baby, stood there stunned. David's mother stumbled back and collapsed into a chair, her voice trembling with guilt. "It's my fault. I should have hidden her ID card. I should have known she was trying to escape." Then, as if a terrifying realization struck her, her eyes widened in horror. They hadn't received any money or ration coupons that month. Her voice turned vicious. She must have gone to that old Oliver's house in Beijing. "We're bringing her back dead or alive. She's still part of this family. Oliver has no right to steal my daughter-in-law." David's father picked up his broken pipe, carefully brushing it off with his sleeve. His expression remained calm, but his tone was commanding. "Yes, we need to bring her back." Then he glanced at the twins in Sandra's arms and murmured seriously, "Who else will take care of my grandchildren if she doesn't?" David finally snapped out of his daze. He and Sandra were supposed to leave the village in a month. They couldn't sacrifice their futures to raise children. He clenched his jaw and nodded. "When the village chief goes to the city in 2 days, I'll buy train tickets to Beijing." That night, Sandra couldn't sleep. She turned to David and whispered, "I never imagined Lily would get into a university. I wonder which one." Annoyed, David scoffed. "What university could it be? It's probably just some technical school," as if the thought alone embarrassed him. But when he looked at Sandra, his expression softened like he was gazing at a treasure. "It doesn't matter where she got in. She'll never be better than you. For someone like her, studying is a waste of money. You, on the other hand, have a bright future." Sandra smiled with pride, basking in his compliments. After all, in those days it was extremely rare to get into a university, especially one for teacher training in Beijing. People from the surrounding villages envied her and praised her constantly. David was still dreaming of dragging Lily back until the next day, when the village chief arrived with devastating news. Lily had submitted an application for a forced divorce from the capital. Chapter 10. The moment David's mother heard the news, she nearly fainted. Even his father, who always pretended to be calm and composed, slammed the table and shouted in rage, "This is a scandal. A disgrace." David's mind was in total chaos. He desperately turned to the village chief, hoping for some kind of solution. But the chief simply shook his head with an uncomfortable expression. "David, this is an official order. There's nothing I can do. It's final. I heard Lily got into Tsinghua University. You'd better leave her alone." When the village chief received the official notice, he had been stunned. He had seen many government documents in his life, but never one that authorized a forced divorce from the Women's Federation. He and the village elders spent hours poring over the papers, searching for any loophole to reverse it. But there was no room for negotiation. It was final. The document clearly stated that Lily and David were officially divorced and free to remarry whoever they wished. Attached to the notice was a detailed record of all the money and ration coupons that had been sent to David's family over the years. The total amount left even the village chief speechless. David's family had been shamelessly greedy. With that amount of money, they could have raised 10 girls like Lily with ease. It even included Lily's educational expenses, making it clear that her benefactor had always wanted her to have a bright future. And what did David's family do? They forced her to drop out of school, marry David, and treated her like a maid for all those years. The villagers had seen it all: Lily's worn-out clothes, the endless chores she did, the way her in-laws never valued her. Looking at David's parents, their faces greasy and bloated, it was obvious where all the money had gone. But Lily had proven her worth. Despite everything, she had been accepted into Tsinghua University on her own merit. David's parents squirmed under the village chief's gaze. But he didn't bother staying. After handing over the divorce papers, he left without another word, leaving David's humiliated family in stunned silence. That girl, is she really not coming back? David's mother still clung to a sliver of hope. But David felt as if his soul had been ripped out. For the first time in his life, he felt completely empty. Sandra, on the other hand, boiled with jealousy. She had never imagined that someone like Lily, someone she always looked down on, could get into the best university in the country. Just days earlier, she had bragged to Lily about her own university acceptance, and Lily hadn't even reacted. Now Sandra understood Lily had probably been laughing at her in secret all along. Chapter 11. My lab partner Eric and I left the lab together, still discussing the experiment's formulas. Suddenly, a classmate ran toward me with an urgent expression. "Lily, your family is at the university gate. They said something serious happened at home." My heart pounded. Had something happened to Grandpa Oliver? I quickly said goodbye to Eric and ran to the entrance. But before I even reached it, I heard a familiar voice shouting, "I'm here for my wife. Who do you think you are, trying to stop me?" "Lily. Lily." It was David. I stepped forward, and the moment he saw me, his eyes lit up with excitement. "Lily, come home with me. Mom and Dad are sick." My expression remained calm. If Aunt and Uncle are sick, they should see a doctor. If it's that serious, Sandra can take care of them. Why did you come looking for me? David's face tensed at the way I referred to his parents. But swallowing his pride, he pressed on. "Lily, no matter how much resentment you feel toward us, my parents raised you all these years. Don't you think it's time to repay that debt? Besides, taking care of in-laws is a wife's duty. Even if you got into Tsinghua, that doesn't mean you can be ungrateful." The onlookers me university classmates whispered among themselves. But as rational students, no one jumped to conclusions. Then Sandra suddenly appeared, ready to play her part. "Lily, I know you're jealous of how close I am to David, but we're just cousins. How could you abandon your children and your in-laws? Do you know how much they miss their mother?" With that, Sandra lifted 2 ragged, crying toddlers from a rickety tricycle. The babies sobbed uncontrollably, dressed in dirty, worn clothes, looking pitiful and miserable. Some onlookers began to waver. "Lily, if that's true, You should go back and care for your family. Yes, the children are innocent. If they're yours, you should raise them. Studies are important, but so is family. This man seems to really care about you. I let out a cold laugh. I didn't argue because I knew they were being manipulated. But public opinion wasn't something only David could control. I looked straight at him. David, were you expelled from the army? Is that why you have time to come here and bother me? Then I turned to Sandra with a mocking smile. What happened? Couldn't you get into university? Or did the truth come out that you were a shameless mistress who wrecked someone else's marriage and gave birth to illegitimate twins? The moment I exposed their shameful secret, David and Sandra's faces turned red with fury and humiliation. I knew ITI had struck the nerve. Long before classes started, I already knew a simple divorce decree wouldn't be enough to keep this shameless family away from me. So I took precautions. I sent anonymous reports to both David's military unit and Sandra's university, exposing their disgraceful conduct. A month later, their dreams were shattered. David was expelled from the army. Sandra was rejected by the university. After all, institutions like the military and prestigious schools had strict moral standards. They weren't going to tolerate people with such dishonorable histories. When David's mother received the news, she was so enraged that she fell seriously ill. His father, already suffering from lung disease after years of smoking, collapsed and became paralyzed upon hearing the truth. With 2 children and no one to care for them, David and Sandra were completely overwhelmed. And as they drowned in their own misery, the only thing they could think about was me peacefully and successfully studying in Beijing, far away from their wreckage. The injustice of it all ate away at them. So, consumed by resentment, they dragged the children and traveled all the way to Beijing, determined to pull me back into their nightmare. Chapter 12. I took out the paternity test results and financial records detailing every cent that had been sent to David's family over the years. The students watching finally understood the truth. The anger in their eyes shifted direction, now aimed at David and Sandra. Though they were educated and rational, their words cut like blades. So, you are the ones who cried wolf first? Can't you see how pathetic you are? One's shameless, and the other's a scoundrel, truly a perfect match. Lily is like a phoenix that fell into a chicken coop. How did she end up tied to a family of parasites like you? David and Sandra's faces turned crimson with shame. Something in those words must have pierced their egos, because David snapped. He lunged at me, grabbing my wrist and dragging me several meters before I could react. Just as I was about to scream for help, bang, David was knocked to the ground in one punch. It was Eric. He stepped forward, shielding me behind him. David glared up from the floor, his face contorting with rage at the scene before him. He pointed at Eric and spat. So he's your lover, isn't he? You abandoned our family for him. He tried to attack Eric again, but this time Eric floored him even more easily. Maybe it was a sense of justice, or maybe David's actions were just too vile, but even the gentlest, most scholarly students joined in, giving David a few well-deserved kicks and shoves while he writhed on the ground. When campus security finally arrived, David was bruised all over, barely able to stand. Sandra rushed to his side to help him up. I stepped forward, my voice loud and clear. David, I owe your family nothing. The money your parents supposedly spent raising me wasn't even 1/10 of what Grandpa Oliver sent you. Yes, I ate your food, but I never once avoided household chores. You and Sandra had an affair and children, so tell me, why are you blaming me for leaving? Everyone has their own path. From this day on, you and I have nothing to do with each other. If you come after me again, don't blame me for showing no mercy. David looked at me, stunned, as if truly seeing me for the first time. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, finally, with his head hung low, he walked away with Sandra. From that day on, he never dared to bother me again. Chapter 13. 4 years later, I stepped out of Professor Mario's office holding the results of our latest research. He had said it clearly: this study would significantly break the foreign blockade against our country. In the field of bomb technology, we were on the verge of a major breakthrough. A wave of good news surrounded me, and my heart fluttered like a bird in spring. That evening, Eric invited me to dinner, and I accepted without hesitation. During the meal, he congratulated me on my success, his eyes filled with pride. I laughed and looked at him. And to think you used to tease me. Without your help, I'd still be far from reaching these results. Eric smiled, his gaze filled with unmistakable tenderness. I grew nervous and looked away, but then he took my hand. I understand, he said softly. Your heart belongs to chemistry, and you'll dedicate your life to it. But don't forget to look at the people around you too, all right? I lowered my head, my heart pounding wildly. After a few seconds, I nodded solemnly. Later, Grandpa Oliver told me about David's downfall. After losing his military position, he fell into alcoholism, drunk, unemployed, unable to care for his children. Sandra, having lost her chance to study, soon crumbled under the burden of raising 2 children and dealing with David's family. She lasted less than a year before running away and abandoning them all. That left David alone to care for his kids and his ailing parents. But David was never a responsible man. Years later, his neglect left his parents bedridden with bedsores, screaming in pain day and night until they died in squalor. As for his children with no discipline and no education, they became delinquents. One day, a villager who knew the truth mocked them, saying, "Your real mother wasn't even half as capable as your adoptive mother. You'll be just as useless as her." When the boys learned that their adoptive mother was actually successful and living in the city, they wept and demanded to be taken to Beijing to find me. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe David's own stupidity, but he forgot all my warnings. He bought 3 train tickets to Beijing. But before they could board, completely drunk, David stumbled onto the tracks. And just like that, he died. When his sons finally found me, they looked like little beggars, dirty and neglected. Through tears, they told me, before Dad died, he kept repeating one thing. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I want another chance, Lily. Wait for me." By then, I had already been awarded the National Medal for Outstanding Contribution, becoming the youngest academic in the research institute. I told them the truth. No matter how much they cried or begged, I sent them to an orphanage. Because if I let pity get in the way, I would be betraying the girl I once was. As I stood there holding my trophy, surrounded by flashing cameras, I saw my past self standing quietly before me. Her lips moved silently, forming one final sentence. "Keep going. Don't look back." In the crowd, Eric was clapping, his eyes steady and full of conviction. And, at that moment, I thought, I will never look back.